Good afternoon. Welcome to Paraspar-Lecture, Being Digital and Gandhian, organized by the Office of Communication, Indian Institute of Science. Before we begin, I would like to give a brief introduction of the speaker today, who doesn't need an introduction. Professor Vijay Chandru is honorary visiting professor, National Center for Biological Sciences, visiting scientist at Harvard School of Public Health, and advisor at Park IISc. Professor Vijay Chandru is an academician and entrepreneur, a technology pioneer at the World Economic Forum since 2006. Professor Chandru was recognized among the 50 pioneers of change by the India Today magazine in 2008. Additionally, Professor Chandru has mentored numerous entrepreneurs and early-stage ventures in the realm of education, technology, and life sciences. His academic career in decision sciences spanned over 4 decades in MIT, Purdue University, and at the Indian Institute of Science. His training in electrical engineering at BITS Pilani and operational research at UCLA and MIT led him to explore academic research at the interface of computational mathematics with geometry, logic, machine learning, biology, and heritage art. A fellow of both the academics of science and engineering in India, he was a national distinguished technologist of the Indian National Academy of Engineering and adjunct professor in biosystems science and engineering and executive advisor to the new art park at the Indian Institute of Science. Professor Chandru serves on the Council of Karnataka State Council of Science and Technology and RJUKT in Andhra Pradesh. He chairs the governing council of the Digital University of Kerala. He is a member of the Vision Group of Biotechnology and as well as Science and Technology in Karnataka. As an author of Atal Innovation Mission Report in August 2015, he served briefly on the Mission High-Level Committee of AIM as convened by the Prime Minister's Office at NITI Aayog. At Strand Life Sciences, India's first example of academic entrepreneurship, Professor Chandru served as founder executive chairman from inception in the year 2000 till 2018. Biospectrum magazine named Professor Chandru the Biotech Entrepreneur of 2007 in India. The Association of Biotech-Led Enterprises, the apex body of the biotech industry in India, elected Professor Chandru as honorary president for 3 years term from 2009 to 2012. Professor Chandru also co-founded the Simputer Trust, which designed and manufactured India's first indigenous handheld computer at the start of the millennium. Professor Chandru has been actively engaged in digital humanities since 2009 and is a founder trustee of the Boutique International Institute of Art, Culture and Democracy. His work at IIScD on digital capture and archiving of tangible and intangible heritage artifacts has been largely funded by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, under the research program in Indian Digital Heritage. Professor Chandru is deeply engaged with the idea of technology levers for bringing universal health care to India. This manifests in his work as commissioner with the Lancet Citizen Commissioner for reimagining India's health systems. We are very happy to have Professor Chandru today. May I invite him to deliver his lecture?
Thank you. Thank you, Vijay. That was a very generous introduction and very happy to be here. Right, there we go. Of course, Mr. Simputer is here as well. So very happy that we'll be able to talk about this. We'll talk a little bit more about this picture later in the talk, but I hope it conveys a little bit of what I'm trying to talk about. That is how we can do very exciting work in technology and make it relevant in some sense to the broader population and to the context of India. And these are actually children in Chhattisgarh playing with the Simputer and for having that early experience with a handheld. This must have been 2002. Yeah. So some time ago. Right? So this talk is actually dedicated to Professor Amulya Reddy, because I think, his vision and I met him while I was I'd heard about him many years and his work here at the Indian Institute of Science, and I met him while I was a PhD student, just around the time he published this book on rural technology. By the way, you can still get this book. It's online and it's also available at the Indian Academy of Sciences. And in the foreword of this book, he writes, hope lies not in the rejection of science and technology, but in its radical reorientation. Starting from the needs of the neediest, self-reliance based on social participation, harmony with the environment, and several fundamental changes in attitudes become necessary. This is about as Gandhian as you can get. And I think he was the inspiration for me to come to the institute, and join here and work here, right? For now close to 35 years. I think since 1988, I've been coming on sabbaticals and then eventually joined the institute in 92. The other dedication is to the real Paraspar, right? The four of us, I think the collective, sometimes called the Gang of Four, sometimes called the Awesome Foursome. But the journey with Manohar, Vinay and Ramesh has been a real embodiment of Paraspar. Right? Every step we took, every challenge we overcame, and every success we celebrated was a testament to the power of mutual benefit, reciprocity, and collaboration. And I think, none of what I've accomplished in these 2.5 decades or so would have been possible, except for 3 decades really, without these compadres, right? Well, we were very fortunate to grow up with 2 towering figures in the family. These are my 2 grandfathers, and they were both Gandhians, right? In their own way, very different. On the left, who was the man who actually raised me and raised my sisters, and Mr. D.N. Reddy. And he was an artist, a literary man, a filmmaker. And his genre of films was labeled Gandhian progressivism because of the themes he chose to make films on and the messages that he gave through films. He was also involved with his brother in publishing the Chandamama magazine. And, so there's it was a fantastic environment to be brought up in Madras, in now Chennai, of course. The other grandfather was also a Gandhian. In fact, I never saw both of them in anything but khadi. They were both always dressed in khadi, and both had, taken the call towards Swaraj and freedom. And I think Guru Reddy, or Bangalore Nana, as we used to call him, was actually a freedom fighter. He'd gone to prison and was actually an author of the Constitution of India. So again, we grew up with these values. So now, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on the title before we jump into examples, I think, which illustrate what I'm trying to get at. I think being digital now to this audience and in this day, I really don't need to explain. Digital, right? But, the thing to remember is that, I hope this works. Yeah. To remember is that this is directional in the sense it's still very dynamic. It's changing, right? While the internet or connectivity was just starting, I think we are starting to get towards, this type of digital where you're actually looking at machines getting more intelligent, and in some sense, I guess the whole AI buzz or whatever we want to call it, but it's so this is rapidly changing, and in a way, this was the journey of getting into this digital evolution that many of us have. I think my contemporary generation actually lived through that, right? I think on the other hand, the Gandhian values, I think are eternal, right, in some sense. They apply at any time period and have that eternal sort of flavor to them. So just to juxtapose, I think. So my digital journey begins with when going to college. Go off to BITS Pilani. There's something a little Gandhian about the campus because J.D. Babu, J.D. Birla as he was known, was still very active in how the BITS campus operated. And he was, of course, someone who was very close to Gandhiji and had been close to the freedom movement and has supported it in many ways. But college itself was college, right? It was fun, playing cricket and taking part in college theater and having fun, right? The influence on digital really, for me, came in my final years of college when, we started specializing more in computing. We were mostly using analog computers, and then suddenly one IBM 360 showed up. And so we started to learn how to program large mainframe computers and so on. But this man came to campus, remarkable guy, an eccentric Englishman, Stafford Beer, who was a friend of Professor C.R. Mitra, who was the director then. And Professor Beer was one of the founders of cybernetics and decision sciences in the UK. And he was a close friend of Salvador Allende in Chile. And so Allende had convinced him to come to Chile and actually build the IT infrastructure for the Chilean government. And of course, as you know, there was a violent overthrow of the government. Pinochet, the general sort of took over. There was a coup, and Professor Beer had to run for his life, pretty literally, and he somehow got out, and Professor Mitra invited him to come for some rest and recuperation in the magnificent oasis of Junjunu. And so we benefited from having him around the campus. And he introduced us to this idea that you could actually use computers and information in a very effective way for governance. And that was, to me, sort of the switch or the trigger to think about research and move in certain directions. So that's what I did. I applied for my graduate studies in departments that focused on decision sciences. Took me to UCLA and then MIT, and got this immersion into various aspects of the mathematics and the computational side of the decision sciences. And of course, in those days, in the late 70s and early 80s, the big methodology was optimization, mathematical optimization. And science was sort of in its third paradigm, which you might think of as the computational paradigm, right? And so building these large computational models and being able to solve them was the main driving agenda. And so numerical analysis and solving large linear systems, so on, became the driving. Then I became a young professor at Purdue University. And now equipped with all these tools, one was able to jump into different aspects of application areas. With geometry and graphics, we got into, computer-aided design and applications in manufacturing, robotics, and so on. And I also got interested and involved in automated theorem proving and logic and applying mathematical methods in making logic engines more efficient. And in those days, actually, we used to think that that was the foundation of artificial intelligence. Of course, now it's taken a different turn and gone more through data science and deep learning and so forth. But these were the kind of technical areas that I was really involved in. In the late 80s, I started visiting India and coming to the Indian Institute of Science. Professor Vishwanathan was my host in computer science and automation. And so basically came back and Professor Manohar had just joined the faculty. They were, you can see, so Vinay, Manohar, Ramesh, and myself, and we were all colleagues in computer science. Of course, Vinay had been a student, graduated, gone off for a while, come back to join the faculty, and Ramesh had moved from New York and Germany to join the faculty, and the four of us decided to work together to create a lab where we'd have fun and we'd actually take thought to action. Essentially, it was a translational lab where we said we should build stuff, right? Not just write papers about them. Right? And actually also write papers. So that's the neat thing. Once you decide to go into action, it has its own sort of research momentum and actually is quite satisfying in that way. So this was the lab that did that. And we went off into sort of two threads. One was more on sort of pushing information technology, and the other was looking at life sciences, because biology was becoming more and more digital and in some sense also data-driven and needed more sort of computer science inputs. And so we'll talk about these two threads more elaborately now. But I think it's actually an important sort of coincidence or concurrence that we see in the history of science that information technology, information science and information technology was more or less coincident with the timelines of modern molecular biology, right? So essentially post-war period for the early breakthroughs and the early ideas, and then, extraordinary progress as the years go along, right? So it actually, we made these choices, but in some sense, these choices turned out to be well-rooted in history and the future. I mean, we couldn't quite know what was coming, but we had a good sense that these were areas to really work in, right? And by the way, I've got 2 points marked here on the information technology side. TIFRAC, by the way, was India's first attempt to build a computer. Right? Homi Baba asked the TIFR gang, including Professor Narasimhan there and so on, to actually build a vacuum tube computer, which was called the TIFR automatic calculator. So that was sort of India's first attempt to actually build a computer from scratch. And the next attempt came at the Perceptual Computing Lab, and that was the Simputer, which we'll talk more about. And really, in some sense, these were important landmarks because, as Manohar pointed out, one couldn't really claim to move into the information age without the domestication of computing, right? And so, you could buy computers and program them, but if you actually built one, then your sort of understanding and your control over it actually comes at a very different level. So the Simputer was an attempt to, of course, do that. But look at what's happening with information technology itself, right? The famous chessboard analogy, right? You're doubling the number of grains on every square of the chessboard. By the time you get to halfway on the chessboard, you've got to 2 to the 32 grains, which is roughly about 4 billion. All right. And by the time you get to 64, of course, you have a heap of grain that is taller than Mount Everest. So that's the power of exponential. And we are in the 90s, somewhere here, where, this uptick is just starting. And so we're sensing this, that computing is going to become ubiquitous, communications is going to go through a big revolution. And there's this realization that information is going to play a very central role, right? So we go back to Professor Amulya Reddy and talk to him about how to think about this technology in the context of sustainable development. And of course, he had drawn diagrams like this many times for energy, right? And different types of technology. But he thought long and hard about how to do it with information and sort of drew up this diagram for us to think about. And it's something that essentially I've carried in with me all through the years. But actually, it was, again, Paraspar, right? There was this huge collective of agency, of, policy, of very extraordinary people like Professor Rodam Narasimha and M.N. Srinivas at NIAS, who sort of suggested that Manohar and I look more closely at the digital divide. And M.N. Srinivas used to call it the urban-rural divide. He said, you drive 5 kilometers of Bangalore or from ITPL, and, what do you see? What difference is this technology making? So this led us to something called the Bangalore Declaration and the Global Village white paper that Manohar and I put together. And in that, we talked about building rugged, low-cost handheld devices, right, as one of the areas in which, technologists in developing countries like ours would actually make a difference. Right. And of course, when we actually went about doing it at the Perceptual Computing Lab, a whole lot of colleagues from around IISc and some from the city participated, and we managed to pull something together, which
we were absolutely convinced right from the beginning, that the Simputer is going to, of course, empower people, because it's a device that is truly universal. It's universal in that it's multilingual. In fact, maybe I should define where the name comes from. The Simputer stands for the simple, inexpensive, multilingual people's computer.
Simputer, and this is my story.
The Simputer is essentially an empowering device.
Our model when we thought about Simputer was a transistor radio, right? You go to any area, semi-urban, rural, you'll find the transistor radio bought 30 years ago, doing excellent business today, getting information, giving you music, and it operates the same way. Just because there is a smaller transistor radio, you don't have to junk it and buy this new one. We want our Simputers you buy today, 10 years from now, you will be using it still.
If I'm looking at it from the viewpoint of a person who has not had an IT thing, it symbolizes, I think, opening doors to a new world and the hope for a better and more informed future.
If time present and time past do indeed inform time future, India is living proof of the need to share information and free knowledge. One of the clear contributions to the great digital divide has been the proliferation of proprietary software.
We have a modem inside. It's a soft modem, so it's implemented in software. Typically modems are implemented in hardware. But since we want a small box which has everything in it, it makes much more sense to have software inside. Now, these modems have to talk across the telephone lines, right? So there's a certain standard language which needs to be used. And the standard language, to use the standard language, you have to pay somebody in the US. I forget how much it is, but maybe $5 a Simputer, which is completely ridiculous.
Keeping in mind the end user, as also the philosophy of Richard Stallman and the Free Software Foundation, the Simputer Trust uses high-quality, free, public domain software from the open source initiative. One of the principal applications enables an Indian non-literate end user to surf the internet to access, for instance, produce prices.
It speaks out in the local language what it means, so the person gets to know what it's all about. And now it shows the price of it shows the picture of the vegetable, and using this he will be able to click on the vegetable and find out what the price of the vegetable is. If he clicks on this arrow here, it takes him to the next vegetable. So there you have onions, and then you have beans.
We are going to try to work towards the goal of having all our formats open so anybody can read it. See, it's like a Word file. If you send me a Word file, I have to have a program of a certain kind to read it. If you send me a text file, I can just use anything. I can just dump it on the screen and read it. So it's quite unreasonable to ask a person to run a certain kind of program to access data.
Information technology and information access has this potential of transforming society both economically and socially into a more vibrant, just and prosperous society.
The Simputer Trust has extended the free software concept to the hardware design of the Simputer platform, thus maintaining an open and extensible architecture, allowing innovators to add value to the platform.
The other thing is that what happens, there are other issues, hardware. What happens if somebody actually derives a new product out of the Simputer? For example, the Simputer has a smart card, but there will be applications where the smart card is not important. So then what happens? So we would like to call those devices as Simputerized devices.
There's nothing in the IT world which is designed in India. In India, from India, by Indians.
You allow people access to ideas so that their own ideas can be more refined, and so the evolution of ideas. And finally, what is wealth? Wealth is the pool of ideas that a society holds. And the more you can enrich that pool, the wealthier you're making your society. So.
The revolution has begun.
The story of the Simputer is one of shared beliefs and hopes. It is also one of rights. The right to information, the right to generate locally relevant information, and the right to the tools that facilitate this process.
So, this was the Simputer, and I thought it was important to actually show you this little clip because you have to understand this is 1998, 99 that we were building this in. The Simputer was a squawk box. It could speak in Indian languages. It was a 7-layer motherboard designed from scratch. The entire Linux kernel ported onto it, X Windows running on it. Went on to, and it had later had an accelerometer, so, long before iPhones and iPods and so on, even thought of these things. In fact, Samsung uses the Simputer as prior art, in all its lawsuits that it fights with Apple. And tells Apple that you were not the first. Right? So in many ways, it was an extraordinary project, probably appreciated more in New York than in India. The New York Times, said this is computing as it would have looked if Gandhi had invented it. And Steve Jobs for marketing. Of course, Steve Jobs was not God then. This is 2001. He was really just a marketing guy. And of course, even this picture that I had on the title slide is displayed in New York by Antonetti, who is a curator who just loved the Simputer and had a whole display around the Simputer. So this was the journey, which was an extraordinary journey. And of course, in many ways, you have to think of Simputer as being, in some ways, enabled by this extraordinary exponential law and technology, which was making things, faster, cheaper, in an extraordinary way. I think in the history of technology, this was sort of really very unique sort of acceleration that we saw, right? Doubling every 2 years, every 18 months, actually. And I got on this theme that molecular biology was sort of on a similar path, right? And in fact, there's an exponential law in molecular biology. And guess what? It's moving even faster than Moore's law, right? And this is the cost and the speed of sequencing, right, of DNA, of genome. And what this implies is, again, something phenomenal. And by the way, behind this amazing technology is an Indian scientist who's now knighted at Cambridge, Sir Shankar Balasubramaniam, who actually developed the machine that is now called Illumina. Was actually developed at Cambridge, and it was called Solexa, and Illumina bought Solexa. And essentially, again, innovation comes from one place, but the actual amplification happens through industry And typically, the US is extraordinary at this scale up and manufacturing and so on. So we think of Illumina as an American product, but it really, again, the ideas come from the UK. But what does this actually mean? Because suddenly we are able to sequence genomes, we're able to actually study them, we're able to understand the underlying biology of what causes disease, what causes traits of different kinds. And so this opens up the door for what you think of as clinical genomics, right? And the most important sort of landmark case is that of this little boy, Nicholas Volker, who's gone through like 100 surgeries, and people are not able to figure out what's wrong with him. And his sequence gets genomed by Howard Jacob, who's with the Master, is a geneticist at the University of Wisconsin. And they figure out, that there is a deleterious sort of genetic mutation which is causing the boy's problems, and they do a bone marrow transplant, and he recovers, right? And this story was covered by the local newspaper in Milwaukee, and it wins the Pulitzer Prize. So, Ramesh and I were fortunate. We actually heard the talk in 2010 of how Howard Jacob had cracked this case, and so we decided that we have to come back and do something about it in India. So we start working with Japanese scientists and solve some neuromuscular disorders. Meanwhile, Angelina Jolie comes out with the fact that she is Ashkenazi Jewish and therefore has the BRCA mutations. And she's lost both her mother and her aunt at early age to breast and ovarian cancer, and therefore is taking the bold steps herself of, surgeries and so on, elective surgeries that would minimize her risk of cancer. So, all these stories are popping up, and so in India we set up the labs and at Strand. And start building out these tests. And we're at a point today that I think we're close to what you might call democratizing genomics. For about 12,000 rupees, you can get a test which actually completely characterizes the genome that you're born with. 20,000 genes, gives you a report, a session with a genetic counselor. And this, is riding on that fast decreasing cost of genome sequencing. That's why we can do this at that price point. And hopefully this has that impact. But of course, we're always about thought to action. So Ramesh, has actually written this extraordinary book published by the IISc Press, called Genomic Works, and I guess you can pick up a copy at the Office of Communications if you like, or you can order it through Amazon. It's available, and it's an extraordinary book. It's written like 9 detective stories, and these are real cases, and it takes you through the clinical condition, the genome sequencing, the informatics involved in analyzing. And finally, the understanding of how to treat these kids, right? And so, I would strongly recommend this book as reading material if this area is of interest. All kinds of new technologies mushrooming everywhere. I'm involved with looking at how to use CRISPR, which is the gene editing technology that won the Nobel a couple of years ago, and using CRISPR to develop fast tests that could be, the analogy that I like to think about is the COVID self-test that we used during the pandemic, where essentially anybody could do this test, right? You don't really need to go to a lab, and you can just self-testing. But imagine that instead of testing an antigen, you're actually testing DNA material. And you're actually able to read out the nucleic pattern that confirms that this is an Omicron or a Delta, or in the case of COVID, but for other pathogens like Salmonella, rotavirus, you could actually be doing these tests in the field right at the point of care. So this is where we're heading in molecular biology, to be able to do things like this extremely rapidly. And sequencing, coming from the other end, is a very powerful tool that can give you a broad spectrum of understanding of nucleic material. So with that combination, I think healthcare is ready for a huge reimagination, and that's part of what we're doing at Art Park, and also through the digital health initiatives at the Institute. And Devnath is here, and we're trying to actually build a whole momentum now towards enabling primary healthcare in a very different kind of way. And at Art Park, we're also thinking through journeys of what a village in 2030 might look like in terms of access to healthcare. And if you go to the website of Art Park, you'll actually see these whole vignettes which have been worked out, which actually talk about how people might be accessing primary healthcare in the future, right? And we hope to do some of that in Bangalore pretty soon, right? I'm just going to touch on one last topic and then close. And this was, I think it was mentioned while introducing me, that I'm part of an organization that looks at art, culture, and digitizing heritage. And one of the things that we've been thinking about is how to democratize heritage. And of course, one way was the Department of Science and Technology said, scan all these things, make them digital, and then put them up on websites. And that's one way of accessing. But really, today, unless you put things on a mobile, it's not really that accessible, right? So we came across this cute idea that a small startup in Bangalore called Flip AR was doing, which was being able to put images on postcards, and then you could scan them with your mobile, and you'd get the stories behind the images, right? And these postcards can be actually used as postcards and mailed to people so that others can then share the experience. And so we thought this is a very cool idea, and we should try to put heritage on this medium. And so the National Museum actually had this display that we had put together on these postcards for talking about stories from the Mahabharata, which are in the paintings in the temples at Lipakshi and so on, right? So just to give you a little flavor of that.
The animated last scene of this mural depicts Arjuna with a crown and prostrating before his father Indra, standing in the Pranamanjali pose, with a Jatabandha turning around and going deep into the forest after receiving the powers from Indra to control the natural elements while performing his tapasya and the instructions on how to propitiate Shiva. Arjuna with Jatabhara stands on one leg and continues his deep tapasya after putting his weapons aside.
I think I'd like to end by going back to Gandhiji's Talisman, because I think it really is probably the moral compass that for scientists and technologists. to always carry within themselves. I think whenever you're in doubt, right, apply the following test. Right? Recall the face of the poorest and weakest man, woman, or child whom you may have seen, and ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use, right, to him or her. And I think this is the moral compass that can make any technology or science relevant and appropriate for the context we live in. And this was the message I got from Professor Amulya Reddy, and I think this is the message that we try to carry through. I think my last project will be towards looking at these children who are born with genetic disorders, what are called orphan diseases, and to see what we can do to help them. So trying to do this through advocacy. I think, our Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi has made this call that it's time to make right to healthcare a fundamental right. And so at a constitutional reform level, there's a need for advocacy, because I think, accountability only comes with making this a fundamental right? Until then, we talk about universal healthcare, but it really means nothing. And then, of course, there's a lot of outreach that's needed, communication, and so forth. And this is what we've been trying to do at IIScD and at other places. So there's an awareness building up. I want to end on this slide, which is courtesy of Professor C.N.R. Rao at JNC. This is often given as awards to outstanding students and so on. But it is extraordinary that Gandhiji himself was quite open to the power of science. But the point is that as he points out, I think everything can be turned into a science or a romance if endeavor is for the benefit of humanity, and love taking the place of greed as a motive. So that's the story of being digital and Gandhian. Thank you. Sure. Yes. I think maybe they're recording, so yeah.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for the impressions. I'm just curious, so what happened to the Simputer in the end?
Well, if you go back to the slide, sorry, it'll take a while, so let's. But I think it's important because this question comes up a lot. And what did I say up here? I said the Simputer meme. Right. Okay. So I think the Simputer lives as a meme. Now it may be in the form of a smartphone, and a foldable smartphone that actually does the functions that the Simputer was intended to do. So, I mean, if the question is, as a retail device, about 40,000, 50,000 pieces were made, and these were tested in various applications. But it didn't succeed. It needed the kind of capital that you see, these types of breakthrough technologies need. And the ecosystem was probably not ready to support something like that so early on. And I think that's probably the quick answer, right? But I'm sure we'll all admit that there were some things we could have done better, but I think we were just early, and I think India was not ready for this kind of innovation.
If I can ask another question. So, as you rightly pointed, we need to ride the wave, as you did for genomics and the healthcare
We made a lot of mistakes with genomics as well. But we're probably too early. We expected the $100 genome to be around corner. It took longer than it should have because Illumina was a monopoly. And
Some guy will do it. Agbai is going to do it probably.
well, anyway, that's an offline conversation, but I think it's getting there.
Yeah.
But it's happening about 5 years later than we anticipated, right? I think
So, given that the ecosystem needs to help things move forward,
Right.
what are the lessons? See, we have the semiconductor initiative now.
Yeah.
Had it been there at that time, do you think something else, the history would have been something different?
Of course. And I was with Vinod Dham 2 weeks back, and just after Ahmedabad, and he told me how he was involved in convincing the PMO to actually invest in this fab and take it forward. And I think these are infrastructure benefits. I mean, today, what is it that strikes you as pretty remarkable in India, and which is actually leading to a certain type of innovation? It is public digital infrastructure, right? And the creation of Aadhaar, and there are lots of pros and cons and so on. But the fact that once that was put in place, and then you had things like the payment interfaces and so on, you saw what could happen with fintech, right? And the fintech industry taking off. The hope is the same infrastructure will also help now in healthcare, as the digital mission, for healthcare also provides that backbone on which you can develop this. Now, but that took investment. Not that the government did the investment entirely, because there was also a huge volunteer effort that was involved, right? The iSpirit group and so on, that actually of professionals who stepped forward and work towards that. So I think we need more of those, public infrastructures, public goods that we need to create. After all, what is this whole success of tech companies in the West? Where does it come from? It comes from the internet, and it comes from the investment in that infrastructure that they made early on and developed that. And without that, you wouldn't have seen these $1 trillion companies come up, right? So Vinod Dham asked me the question, what is it in biology that can do this? And I think we'll be building our own sequencer. I don't know. It's just it was just one guess, but we wouldn't have been hostage. Look at China; they built their own sequencer at MGI, and today they're cheaper, faster than Illumina. Unfortunately, we can't get their machines here, but they are, they have taken on the US, and so I think we. I think this investment in this infrastructure is important.
One last question.
Don't give the mic to a professor.
The sickle cell
sure.
disease that you're talking about.
And by the way, there's a wonderful technology at the institute as well on sickle cell and
Yes.
Chandru,
Yes,
yeah.
So here you're targeting which kind of patients, if you know about it?
Well, I think these are because this actually recognizes the genotype with CRISPR. We can be a substitute for the HPLC.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, what Sai, Gorti and others have developed at Shanmukha is a screening device which could substitute what is done today with copper plate solubility tests, which are used for the first level of screening. So he has something probably more accurate and more precise with the Shanmukha spectroscopy system. But finally, for confirmation, you need the genotype. And that we will get with the CRISPR.
So this can exactly point to the gene.
Yeah, the actual mutation picks up the mutation.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
So you pointed out a few Gandhian values. So of those being eternal and how dynamic the digital age is. So I was just wondering, so one of the traits that comes across when you think of Gandhi is he was actually able to bring the nation together towards like one cause across, I mean, forgetting all the differences that were there, then towards a common cause. And so when you think of digital and healthcare, so what do you think that would be for India, and how do you think those values of collaborative nature and into for a common larger purpose would be?
Yeah, I think in healthcare it's very obvious that what we really need to do is more on the preventive side of healthcare. If we healthcare has largely been targeting sickness rather than care. Right? Really, so it's sickness care rather than health care. And so how do we actually intercede at the early stage, at the primary stage, with early diagnosis, and also with things like nutrition and the various wellness approaches. And I think the fact is today with technology, with what we can do is we can actually have precision nutrition delivered at population scale, where you could actually be matching with food produce which is local with the nutritional needs of the individual, and actually working out the supply chains to make that delivery possible. Now, that would be the kind of goals in healthcare, leveraging technology in every which way that you could think of. If you were imbibing all the Gandhian values. Right.
Thanks.
Yeah. I mentioned nutrition. There's the vanguard of nutrition. Yeah.
Actually, I was just curious as to how does all of this come together? We're talking about individual things where technology is being used, digital makes a very big difference. But at the end of the day, when you think about nutrition or healthcare, we are impacting the life of an individual, individuals, different cohorts, and so on. So how does technology help in coalescing many disparate aspects which have to work together to deliver something which is healthy and nutritious? And I'm glad you talked about, sick care. Healthcare is actually sick care. If you look at, let's say, the primary healthcare centers, and if one of the objectives was to really control as much as we can at the primary healthcare center so that secondary and tertiary care is not needed, there's a huge saving in healthcare cost as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is where you need to focus. But that is not where I would say, the lobby allowed things to go, right? Whether you want to think of it as the tertiary healthcare lobby or you want to think of it as the pharmaceuticals and so on, they all have a role, but actually they've actually forced us to focus primarily on the sickness care, right?
Yeah.
And so it actually requires, as Amelia said, I think what we really require is this. Several fundamental changes in attitudes are necessary. And I think without that, it's really difficult to crack this.
Yeah, we're talking about a world where the healthcare industry, or the sick care industry, as you rightly called it, is larger than the food industry.
Yes.
So there's something terribly wrong.
Yes. absolutely. Yeah. And, there have been some experiments. Gurmeet at the Transdisciplinary University has been running these experiments in, I guess, on the Mysore Road, some of the villages, the Mysore Road, where he has been looking at nutrition and health parameters at the primary healthcare level and trying to, and Gurmeet, as you've met him, he's a food scientist at Transdisciplinary. So, I think people have ideas, but actually to scale them and to implement them is where you run into the lobbies and the funding biases and so forth, right? So I think that it is the direction in which we have to move. I think India cannot afford to go to the kind of expenditure that we've seen in the West, which is now starting to get to 15-20% of GDP, which is out of control. Right?
That's a question.
Madam Doctor, thank you for the wonderful talk. It's quite difficult to frame this question, but I'll ask anyway. Now, you talked about right to health as a constitutional reform. But don't you think it is the loggerheads? Because governments are seeking investments and investments want returns. I'm a law graduate and it's a molecular biology course in the US. Spending a lot of time in the hospital setup as well. Thank you.
So I didn't quite get the question.
Mr. Satyarthi's goal of right to health seems to be the loggerhead with government seeking investments in every sector. I go to a lot of medical conferences. Every conference has a pharmaceutical or a surgical input, or even a genomic machine input. If your idea is to develop a machine to compete with Illumina, how do you plan to deal with their abusive marketing and their tactics not tactics, their advertising campaigns with doctors and healthcare professionals, and how do you plan to work on that?
Well, I don't claim to have all the answers to actually solving these problems. These are very big problems. But you're right that is where the focus is, and what I'm challenging is that that's the wrong focus, right? And so we all have to do what we can to actually change that focus. It's not that tertiary care hospitals, advanced equipment. I mean, I wouldn't be standing here talking if those were not a reality. I don't know if you're aware, but I was riddled with bullets by a terrorist attack in 2005, and I wouldn't be functioning if it weren't for that advanced therapeutic care that a tertiary hospital was able to provide that night and for months afterwards. And so I was able to come back to work. But so no one is denying that they have an important role to play. And I think it's just that what do you emphasize? And again, can't you have both? I mean, there is no reason why we shouldn't be moving towards both. It may be that the cutting edge sort of tertiary care at some level requires huge outlays of private capital, and so, but then you still work out a system, and that's what insurance systems are, to be able to spread the costs of being able to make that accessible to every citizen. Right? And there are experiments that have shown that this is possible. I mean, you go to Narayan Hrudayalaya and you see the kind of service that they provide to people. Of course, in cardiac care, it's a little easier. In cancer care, it would be much more complicated. But there are models emerging and which have been able to spread the burden, right? And so that even the most dispossessed, the neediest are still being provided a certain level of healthcare, which a fundamental right would ensure that they would. Right? And I think this, the fundamental right issue, I think it's really strange that we use a directive principle of right to life to talk about right to healthcare, which is really incorrect. I think as a modern civilized nation, it's high time we had a right to healthcare, fundamental right.
So, one last thing. I really appreciate your effort, because this is what is needed. When I travel across India, well, in fact, I went to military boarding school in Bangalore. So I appreciate that you recovered blood injuries. The fact is, sometimes
ask for it. Yeah, right.
Sometimes small behavioral changes are the key to many things. I mean, you see aggressive marketing by the tobacco, alcohol campaigns. Well, I spent a lot of time with solid tumors in oncology. And then even fast food industry is targeting everybody left and right. And even internet, to some extent, is a sort of addiction as well. So I think we as scientists need to also address some of these issues as well.
Oh, absolutely. I serve on the National Task Force for Oral Cancer.
Yeah.
And, we look at the whole issue of tobacco and both oral and smoking and the impacts it has. And so I think maybe we can put this offline, because I think these are big issues and it's definitely worth talking about.
Any question?
Sir, I don't have a question, but I just want to conclude this with something that I have on the wall of my office,
Sure.
which was given to me by one of well-known Gandhian figures of recent times, Mr. Sudhindra Kulkarni, gentleman from Bombay.
Of course.
Yeah.
ORF.
Yeah, ORF. Yeah.
Mr. ORF. Yeah, sure.
Many things are impossible and yet are the only things right. A reformer's business is to make the impossible possible by giving an ocular demonstration of the possibility in his own conduct. Whoever thought it possible before Edison to speak to people hundreds of miles away from us, Marconi went a step further and made wireless communication possible. We are daily witnessing the phenomenon of the impossible of yesterday becoming the possible of today, as in physical science, so in psychological. This is by Gandhi.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Professor Vijay Chandru, first for accepting our invitation and secondly for this wonderful lecture. And thank you everyone for the interesting question. We have a small token of appreciation. May I request Malavika Pillai from the Office of Communication to deliver the gift.
Thank you so much. Thank you, of course.
Thank you everyone. Please join for tea outside.
And some return gifts. I have a few of those Kira Gandhian cards. If anybody wants, you're welcome to that.